Despair does not always wear torn clothes or carry the smell of hunger. Sometimes he arrives disguised as dignity, walking upright even when the world collapses around him. The dust kicked up by the horse's hooves was still dancing in the air as Martha Reynolds stepped down from the borrowed wagon. Her hands trembled as she smoothed the black dress, the same one she had been wearing for 3 months, since Samuel's funeral. The fabric was faded by the relentless Texas sun, but it still retained the solemnity of mourning. She took a deep breath, feeling the dry air burn her lungs, and looked up at Lost Hope Ranch. The name was engraved on a weathered wooden plaque that swayed gently in the warm afternoon wind. Irony or prophecy, Martha couldn't say. He only knew that there was his last hope before the bank took over the small house where he still lived with his 2 children. The ranch stretched out before her like a world apart. Wooden fences divided pastures where cattle took shelter under the few trees available. The main house, built of stone and wood, exuded a solidity that Martha had not felt for a long time. It was the kind of place where a man could build something lasting, something that would withstand the storms of life. John Mackenzie emerged from the shadow of the stable as an apparition of the Wild West itself. Tall, with broad shoulders that hard work had shaped, he walked with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of the earth beneath his feet. The leather hat protected a face marked by the sun and experience, and his blue eyes had the intensity of someone who had learned to read people's intentions before they knew them themselves. Martha felt the weight of his gaze on her as she approached. There was something about the way John watched her that made her feel both vulnerable and protected. He stopped a few steps away, respectful but cautious, like a man who had learned to measure words before he uttered them. The wind blew between them, carrying the smell of dry hay and the promise of a distant storm. Martha mustered all the courage she could find and took the first step toward the man who could change the course of her story. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and red that made the desert seem even more vast and unforgiving. It was in this kind of evening that the most important decisions of life were made, when the light of day gave way to the shadows of uncertainty. John removed his hat in a simple courtesy, revealing dark hair speckled with premature gray. There was kindness in her eyes, but also a deep sadness that Martha recognized immediately. It was the same sadness I saw in the mirror every morning, the mark left by loss and loneliness. Martha took another deep breath, preparing herself for the words that could save her family or seal her fate forever. The most difficult words are those that carry the weight of necessity. They come out of the mouth like stones, too heavy to fly, but too necessary to remain stored. Martha felt each word slowly form in her throat before finding the courage to release them. He explained his situation with the dignity of someone who still held his head high, despite the circumstances. He talked about Samuel, about the children who were waiting at home, about the debts that grew like weeds after the rain. Her hands remained steady as she spoke, but John could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she lightly bit her lower lip when the emotion threatened to boil over. John listened to each word in silence, his eyes never moving away from Martha's face. There was something about her determination that impressed him. It was not the desperate determination of one who begs, but the steadfastness of someone who still believes he has something to offer the world. When she mentioned her experience in the kitchen, in the laundry, in animal care, he nodded slowly, acknowledging the value of each skill. The wind changed direction, bringing with it the distant mooing of the cattle and the creaking of the planks of the main house. John looked around his property, seeing it through Martha's eyes for the first time in years. The place really needed a woman's attention. Since Sarah had died 2 years ago, the house had lost its soul, becoming just a place where he slept between workdays. But there was something more to Martha's proposal, something she hadn't said in words. John could see the loneliness in his eyes, the same loneliness that accompanied him every night as he sat on the porch stargazing. 2 people carrying the weight of loss, finding themselves at a time when they both needed something that only the other could offer. John's answer came from a deep place, where reason was mixed with a need that he himself did not fully understand. It wasn't just about having someone to take care of the house or prepare meals. It was about having a reason to turn on the lights in the room at night, about having someone to share the weight of the hard days with. When John uttered the words about marriage, the air between them seemed to thicken. It wasn't a romantic statement or a traditional request. It was a practical proposition wrapped in brutal honesty that only people who knew the real loss could understand. He offered security, stability, a future for his children. In return, he would ask for company, partnership, someone to share the burden of keeping alive a place that had lost its reason for existing. Martha felt the world spinning lightly around her. The proposal was so unexpected that for a moment she couldn't fully process what she had heard. She looked at John's calloused hands, at eyes that reflected sincerity and vulnerability in equal parts, at the property that stretched out like a promise of stability. The sun continued its descent, and the shadows began to lengthen across the courtyard. Somewhere far away, a coyote howled, reminding them that the desert never sleeps completely. Martha knew she needed time to think, but she also knew that time was a luxury she didn't have. John remained motionless, waiting for an answer that could change both of their lives forever. He had set his heart on the table with the same candor with which he treated every aspect of his life, with no flourishes or empty promises, just the unvarnished truth of two survivors, recognizing each other in the unforgiving vastness of the American West. There are moments in life when fate presents itself disguised as an impossible choice. It is in these moments that we discover what we are truly made of, when the masks fall and we face our purest essence. Martha closed her eyes for a long moment, feeling the warm wind caress her face. Behind her closed eyelids, she could see the faces of her children. Emma, only 8 years old, with her golden curls and curious eyes that still shone despite the difficulties, and 12-year-old Thomas, who had been trying to be the man of the house since they lost his father, carrying responsibilities too heavy for his young shoulders. Samuel's memory was still alive in every fiber of his being. They had been more than husband and wife. They were soulmates, united by a love that had grown since their youth. He never imagined that one day he would be considering such a practical arrangement, so far removed from the novel he had known. But life had taught him that love takes many forms, and sometimes the greatest demonstration of love is to accept what reality offers for the sake of those who depend on us. When Martha opened her eyes, she found John watching her with infinite patience. There was something comforting about the way he waited, unhurried, unpressed, just offering his solid presence as a beacon amid the storm of his emotions. She realized that he understood the magnitude of what he was asking, and that quiet understanding created a connection between them that words could never express. Martha began to walk slowly through the courtyard, her footsteps echoing softly on the beaten earth. He looked at every detail of the property with fresh eyes, the abandoned vegetable garden that could flourish again with proper care, the windows in the main house that seemed to beg for delicate curtains, the well-built stable that spoke of John's dedication to his work. She could imagine Emma running free through the fields, not worrying about the next rent payment, and Thomas learning the skills of an honest man alongside someone who could be the father fate had taken from him. The afternoon continued its inexorable march toward twilight, and the first stars began to dot the gradually darkening sky. Martha stood before a fence and rested her hands on the rough wood, feeling its real, solid texture. It had been a long time since I touched on something that represented true stability. John approached slowly, keeping a respectful distance, but his presence was comforting like the warmth of a fireplace on a cold night. He didn't press for an answer. He just shared the moment with her, allowing her to make the decision in her own time. This kindness touched Martha in an unexpected way. Samuel had also been like this, patient, understanding, able to offer strength without imposing his will. The thought made her realize something fundamental. John was not proposing to replace Samuel in his heart. He was offering to create something new, different, but equally valid. A companionship based on mutual respect, shared need, quiet understanding of two people who had faced deep loss and emerged determined to rebuild their lives. Martha turned to face him completely. In John's blue eyes, she saw reflections of her own journey, the pain of loss, the daily struggle for survival, the overwhelming responsibility to protect those we love, and finally, the courage to accept a new chance when it presents itself unexpectedly. The night wind brought with it the aroma of wildflowers growing in the distant fields, a sweet fragrance that contrasted with the harshness of the environment. It was as if nature itself offered its silent blessing for what was about to happen. Martha felt a strange peace descending upon her, as if all the pieces of a complex puzzle were finally beginning to find their place. It wouldn't be a young romantic's dream wedding, but it would be something perhaps more precious, a union based on honesty, mutual respect, and a shared determination to create something beautiful from the fragments of their broken lives. She thought about how she would explain all this to Emma and Thomas, how she would make them understand that sometimes the best decisions are those that the heart accepts, even when the mind still hesitates. I knew they needed stability, a future that wasn't built on constant uncertainty. And John, with his straightforward and honest proposal, was offering just that. The moon began to rise on the horizon, casting a silvery light over the arid landscape. It was a new moon, a symbol of new beginnings, of cycles that are renewed even when all seems lost. Martha took this as a sign, a reminder that life always offers second chances to those brave enough to accept them. There are decisions that transform our lives at the very moment we make them, forever altering the course of our personal history. And there are others that slowly transform us, like the rain that gradually softens the most arid land. Martha finally turned to John, and in her eyes he could see that a choice had been made. It wasn't a dramatic statement or a moment of overwhelming passion. It was something deeper and more lasting, the mutual acceptance of two tired souls who recognized in each other the possibility of starting over. She nodded slowly, and John understood that this simple gesture sealed a deal that went far beyond words. The days that followed brought a strange mix of normalcy and transformation. Martha returned home that night, but something fundamental had changed in her attitude. Emma and Thomas immediately saw the difference, though they were too young to fully comprehend what it meant. She explained to them about John Mackenzie and the new home that awaited them, carefully choosing her words so that they understood that it was not a question of replacing the memory of her father, but of accepting the protection that life was offering. Thomas, with his precocious maturity wrought by circumstances, asked practical questions about the new life. Emma, on the other hand, demonstrated the natural adaptability of children, already imagining what it would be like to have space to run, and maybe even a small horse to call her own. Martha watched her children's reactions with a mixture of relief and apprehension, knowing she was making the right choice even if the path ahead was still uncertain. John also spent those days in deep reflection. He walked through the fields of his property, seeing everything with renewed eyes, imagining what it would be like to share that space with a family. Long ago, the main house echoed only with his solitary footsteps, but now he found himself planning small renovations, thinking about how to make the place more welcoming to a woman and two children who would soon call it home. The ceremony was held on a Saturday morning, simple as befitted the circumstances. The justice of the peace of the nearest town conducted the vows in straightforward and practical language, without romantic flourishes that would not match the nature of their union. Martha wore her least worn dress, dark blue as the sky before the storm, and John had polished his boots and styled his hair more carefully than he had in years. Emma and Thomas remained by their mother's side throughout the ceremony, small presences that reminded everyone present that this union was about much more than two individuals. It was about the formation of a new and unlikely family, created not by fate, but by the determination of ordinary people to build something better from the pieces of their previous lives. When John slid the simple ring onto Martha's finger, she felt the weight of the metal, as a symbol of security rather than romantic love. It was no less significant for that. In fact, there was something deeply honest about that moment, a quiet promise that they would both strive to turn that practical union into something truly valuable as time went on. The first day as a family at Lost Hope Ranch was a symphony of small adjustments and mutual discoveries. Martha explored every corner of the house, mentally organizing improvements and changes that would make the place more functional. John watched as she moved through the space, admiring how efficiently she identified needs and solutions. Emma discovered that there was a wildcat living in the stable, a shy creature that gradually began to accept her gentle presence. Thomas found in John a patient teacher, someone willing to explain the workings of the ranch and gradually include him in daily responsibilities. It did not try to replace the father the boy had lost, but it offered the guidance and structure he desperately needed. The first few weeks brought unexpected challenges. Martha found that managing a ranch-sized estate required different skills than she possessed, but John demonstrated infinite patience in teaching her the practicalities of large-scale rural life. He, in turn, had to readapt to the constant presence of other people, especially the needs and energies of two children. But it was also the small joys that defined those early days. The aroma of fresh bread that has returned to fill the kitchen, the sound of childlike laughter echoing through the long empty hallways, the sense of renewed purpose that came with the responsibility of caring for a family. John found himself smiling more often, while Martha discovered that hope could be reborn even in hearts that thought they had lost her forever. One night, While stargazing from the porch of the main house, Martha and John finally talked about the future in a deeper way. They didn't make grandiose promises of eternal love, but they talked about building trust, about creating family traditions, about giving her children the stability and opportunities they deserved. It was a practical conversation, but charged with a gentle intimacy that neither of them expected to find so soon. Time has the wisdom to transform arrangements into affections, needs into true choices, and strangers into family. At Lost Hope Ranch, this transformation happened like the sunrise in the desert, gradual but inevitable. 6 months after the simple ceremony, the property had been completely transformed, not just in its physical appearance, though Martha's garden now flourished with vegetables and herbs that perfumed the morning air, and the curtains sewn by her hands brought color and warmth to the once empty windows. The real transformation was in the atmosphere of the place, in the way the previously silent spaces now pulsated with family life. Emma had become the little queen of the ranch, winning over not only the wildcat that now followed her like a faithful shadow, but also the rough heart of Jake, the older cowboy who had worked for John for nearly a decade. The rude man who rarely smiled now carved small wooden toys for the girl and taught her to recognize the different mooing of cattle. Thomas flourished under John's careful guidance, developing skills that went far beyond manual labor. The older man taught him not only how to ride and manage cattle, but also how to read people, how to make fair decisions, how to carry responsibilities without letting them crush his youthful spirit. It was an education no school could provide, forged in the practical wisdom of those who had survived and thrived in the rough lands of the West. Martha and John discovered that their union, born of necessity, had grown into something much deeper and more valuable. It was not the overwhelming love of youth, but a mature affection based on mutual respect, admiration for each other's qualities, and the shared satisfaction of building something beautiful and lasting together. They became true partners, sharing not only the responsibilities of the property, but also dreams for the future. One spring afternoon, as Martha tended her vegetable garden and watched the children play in the courtyard, she realized that she had stopped wearing only her black dress. Without consciously noticing the change, he had begun to choose clothes with brighter colors, as if his soul was finally allowed to bloom again. Samuel would always remain in her heart as her first love, but she had learned that the human heart has infinite capacity for different kinds of affection. John also changed in subtle but significant ways. The solitary rigidity that characterized him had given way to a gentle flexibility. He learned to modulate his voice when he spoke to Emma, to listen to Thomas's concerns about the seriousness he deserved, and to value Martha's opinions on matters he had previously considered exclusively male. The farm thrived not only on his hard work, but on the unique contribution of each family member. The ranch has become known in the region not only for the quality of its cattle, but for the hospitality of its owners. Martha had instituted a tradition of welcoming weary travelers, offering hearty meals and a safe place to spend the night. John initially resisted the idea, but soon realized that this generosity attracted good workers and strengthened the property's reputation among local merchants. One summer evening, as the family gathered on the porch to escape the heat, Martha realized she had found something she didn't even know she was looking for: a real home. It wasn't just a roof over their heads or financial security, although those things were important. It was the feeling of belonging, of being part of something bigger than herself, of contributing to the construction of a future that would benefit not only her children, but also the generations that would come after. Thomas, now 13 and about John's height, spoke enthusiastically about his plans to expand horse breeding. Emma, growing up like a desert flower, strong and resilient, dreamed of becoming a teacher in the nearest town, but always coming home to the ranch. Their dreams were not limited by the difficult circumstances of the past, but fueled by the possibilities that the present offered. John watched his makeshift family with a deep contentment he hadn't felt in a long time. I had learned that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as challenges, and that the courage to accept the unexpected can lead to joys we could never have planned or imagined. Martha held John's rough hand as they watched the stars, and they both understood without words that they had created something rare and precious. It was not the romantic story they might have imagined in their youth, but it was a true story, built on solid foundations of respect, joint work, and mutual dedication. Lost Hope Ranch had found its hope again, not in the way its original founders envisioned, but through the determination of ordinary people to turn need into opportunity, loneliness into companionship, and fragments of broken lives into a strong, close-knit new family. As the night wind whispered through the fields that now thrived under her care, Martha knew she had made the right choice. That distant day when she arrived at the ranch looking only for work and found an entire future waiting for her. If you were moved by the story of Martha and John at Lost Hope Ranch, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our Wild West narratives.